Hey, everybody. What's up? Welcome to another edition of Coffee and Contracts. I am your host, Rusty Witten with CARR Commercial Realty, and I am super excited about today's episode. Got one of my favorite humans on this planet here with me today. Excited to talk with Mason, but Mason is in a similar role as I am within our company, and I thought it would be a good opportunity today to talk through this with him just about representation, why it matters, why specialization matters, does location matter, and what are the things you need to understand when choosing representation for your real estate deals. This is usually one of the highest line items on your P&L. So what better way to talk through it than with my guy Mason.Grieser from Chattanooga, North Georgia, all over Georgia, Tennessee. Mason, how you doing, buddy?
Great, man. It's wonderful to be here, Rusty, and high praise come from you, man. Love getting the opportunity to work with you, to throw ideas back and forth. And I think this is a great idea. Just opening the dialogue, creating space for conversations just like this, and honored to be able to be a part of it. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, man. When I was kind of cooking up this idea, I was trying to think of who would be good guests to come on here and talk about the different topics that I was kind of planning out, and you instantly popped in my mind because
I was going to say you ran out of the list quick, right?
No.
We're getting to the bottom of the barrel early on in the conversation.
No, like when I made this list, like you were one of the first things I wrote down because I thought, I've seen you out and hustle. I've seen how you work for your clients and how you connect with people and like how you just get what we do so well. That I was like, man, I got to get this guy on to talk about what we do and why it's important, as we're, like you said, just creating a space for conversation, education. The whole goal of this is educating me. It's pretty selfish. But if a few people out there catch a few little nuggets, it ends up, a rising tide lifts all ships, as they say, for sure.
Absolutely, man. I'm going to be learning too. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So Mason, tell us a little bit about your background, kind of your history with CARR, what got you into this role, just kind of who you are as a real estate strategist, agent, all the above.
Yeah, man. Been with CARR coming up on 2 years. Actually came from the ministry background. Prior to that, I was in worship ministry for several years and came into CARR. I'd actually known Colin for a couple of years, kind of in and out of a few circles that my wife is a part of. He's a part of a couple of different ministries that we've always, had a hand in and looked up to, and just a genuinely great person to be around. And if you've ever had the chance to meet with our founder, our CEO, Colin CARR, just hear him speak on a podcast, a man will make you want to run through a wall. So I'd been sipping on the Kool-Aid just a little bit, years past, and always had a lot of intrigue about this world, the commercial real estate world. Every person that I'd spoken to had come through CARR had nothing but high praise regarding the training and the application, and that's been nothing but the truth. So I love getting to work at this company because of the people like this exact moment is some of my favorite part of getting to be a part of this organization, because like you mentioned, the high tide raises all ships, and when you're in a group of people that have a similar mindset about serving others at a high level, connecting the dots, and providing, the providers, the healthcare experts, the doctors that we represent, a high level of service, it gives a lot of opportunity to grow yourself. And so it's been wonderful. Been doing real estate with CARR for about 2 years now, and not looking back anytime soon. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. Tell me about it, man. We are helping people who help people. And I don't know that there's been a more rewarding role in my career. As a physical therapist, I helped a lot of people, but just being able to help those that then turn around and help others. Like, I feel like I've still got my hand in that healthcare bucket. But like you said, like I know that these guys we're dealing with like world-class healthcare providers. Mm-hmm. And I understand the lack of business education and lack of just real estate education we get in grad school, because you're so focused on becoming a great doctor, learning your skill set. The last thing you're in there learning is about P&Ls and tenant improvement and assumption or assignment clauses or any escalations, anything like that.
Right.
And so if we can help provide that information in forums like today, one-on-one coffee meetings, that sort of thing, that's how we can impact the healthcare field and help those who help others. So
absolutely.
So I think we'll go ahead and dive right in. One of the biggest things, Mason, about our company that I'm really proud of and stand by and certainly mention in any meeting that I have is that we are tenant buyer exclusive. And so what, in your opinion or your words, what does tenant buyer exclusive mean, both in a literal sense and to you as an agent being tenant buyer exclusive? What does that mean?
Yeah. So in any real estate transaction, there's really two sides to the negotiating party, right? There's the seller, there's the landlord, and then there's the buyer or the tenant that's coming into the space. And when you're representing the buyer and the tenant only, it does a couple of things, like you're mentioning. From a literal standpoint, it just establishes really clear lines of who's playing for who, who's working for who. But my favorite part, and I'm sure that this is something that comes up for you, is that it allows us to be really conflict free within the market and provide service to our clients, the healthcare providers, the doctors that we represent, free of charge. In a residential real estate world and in commercial, it's very similar, where the costs associated for representation are built into the sale or the leasing of the space. And so when you exclusively represent the buyer and the tenant, your client is never on the hook to pay you anything out of pocket. And it also allows them to make sure that they're viewing the entire picture of the market, that they're not just working, with, if you are only working with the landlord's, portfolio, or the listing agent that might be representing that landlord, you're going to get a much smaller scope of what's actually taking place within the city that you're interested in establishing a practice, rather than getting a full picture of what might be on or potentially even off the market, based on what things are shaking, and what things are changing in the city that you're in. So love getting to talk to clients about buyer and tenant sole representation, and representing conflict free and free of charge to the doctors and the providers that we serve.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man, because like so many times, right, you see like the conflict of interest is there in the commercial world, right? You can't fully represent the landlord and fully represent a tenant in a transaction. Your allegiance has to fall somewhere, right? You have to shade to the landlord, who's a savvy businessman or woman trying to make money on their property. Like, they're not the bad guy in these transactions and in these deals. And I think that's often misrepresented sometimes. Like this, this landlord, we think about like the Boss Tweeds back in the day, back in the early 1920s in New York. Exactly, it's like running all these slums. That's not who these people are. They're just savvy business people trying to make money on their practice. And they have representation and specialized representation, which we'll get to here in a minute. It only makes sense for our clients to have that same representation walking into a deal. Otherwise, you're fighting an uphill battle, right? Exactly. Colin tells a story all the time of how he founded this company that y'all hear on a future episode. And it's just, it started out of a landlord maximizing his profit in a space on a dentist who was really uneducated about the real estate market and understanding what that is. So if you have somebody, as Mason said, on your side that's not only free of charge, which we are to our clients, paid exclusively by landlords or sellers or not at all, but having somebody that understands what it means to be in a tenant, be a tenant or be a buyer in these transactions, Mason, because we do these nationwide, hundreds every year. Having that in your corner is vital to making sure you're getting the best deal in market, because we understand what that looks like, right? I know you've had some experience in that. Anything that comes to mind, any cases that jump to mind about when you were able to find a great deal, or are you finding great deals in your market right now?
Yeah. And even to just say one more thing too about the representation piece is that, if there aren't clear lines drawn, frankly, the bigger fish is typically the landlord. And so if you're having somebody who's working on both sides of the coin, a lot of times that landlord who has a much bigger portfolio can attract way more loyalty. Like Rusty said, it's really difficult to be able to pull things over. But you were mentioning, finding properties. A lot of times when it comes to representation, if you don't have the ability to take a look at the full scope of the market, oftentimes you're going to be pegged into whatever the availability is that's within the specific firm, the specific agent, the specific landlord's portfolio. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times it can make a really big market, or even sometimes a really small market, feel even smaller because you're only get a fraction of really what's actually happening. And I'll say too, those other listing agents, it's a very competitive world for them as well. They're all trying to represent the same landlords, the same way that, it can become a pretty quick fight between those listing agents that are out there. And so because of that, a lot of times they're not sharing information as often as what the listing agents that we might be working with would be quick to tell us about opportunities that might be off the market, opportunities that might not, that would be very adequately suited for healthcare, but not much else. And so, finding great properties or great opportunities in the market, our structure, the integrity of the way that CARR is set up allows us to be positioned for success from the jump. because we're able to not only have conflicts or no conflicts of interest with the clients that we represent, but also we can build strong relationships with these listing agents and often be a first contact for them when they start to hear rumblings of things that might not even be listed for 6 or 9 months before they come onto the market, which can be massive for staying ahead of things.
That's such a great perspective, because we do have that kind of peer-to-peer professional relationship. They understand that, the market and the rates and the terms. We understand market rates and terms. And so it kind of levels the playing field for these docs from a representation standpoint, to not be out there like doing a DIY real estate project. If you want to do a for sale by owner on your home, that's a whole different animal than on your business, where you're going to be paying on a lease for 5, 8, 10 years, sometimes longer. If you find the right spot for you and you're going to stay there. So wouldn't you want to, be saving money month over month, getting money back in your pocket through tenant improvement and free rent on the front end of a lease that you may not know or can get without the right representation? There's such a good perspective about those, like just that competitive nature of the market, because these listing agents are competing to prove their worth to the landlord. And if they can find a unsavvy tenant, and an unsavvy tenant is defined as a tenant without representation, point blank, they know that they're walking into an opportunity where they can make a ton of money off this client and for this landlord, which for them is a promotion, a pay raise, more portfolio to handle. And that's what they're trying to win over for the landlords. Where when you have tenant buyer exclusive, we don't have any of that extra motivation. Our motivation is you.
Right.
You made a great point, right? Like they come to me and say, hey, I want to open a dental practice in Germantown. Well, I go look at all the spaces available in Germantown instead of just within my landlord's portfolio. And like you said, there may be some on market, off market. We go out and cold call and network and interact with these practices on a weekly basis. We may know of one that might be coming up for sale in the next couple of months, or hey, they're actually moving out because they're buying a building and this is going to be up for lease in the next 3 or 4 months. What's your timeline look like? So we can kind of help streamline that process for our clients in a way that a agent with conflicts of interest can't, or a doctor who's representing themselves cannot either.
Yeah. And you mentioned something too, where you said that, an unsavvy tenant, and in that situation, just unrepresented. Even sometimes you'd think, well, I'm a healthcare provider, like I spent a lot of time in school. I spent a lot of time, working on my craft. It's not necessarily that it's not about being uneducated in any field by any means. It's about being so overqualified that the landlord often views you as easy pickings, because they know that you can pay. They know that you can, a lot of times the worst leases that I see typically are the ones where the doctor goes directly to the landlord or directly to the listing agent and has one property in mind, doesn't get a picture of everything else that's happening within the market. And the landlord takes them for as much as they can possibly get, because they're so savvy at what they do best, right? When you're so good at your job that you can, take a look at if you don't have to get, or you don't take a comparison of everything that's happening in the market, a lot of times it can leave you, negotiating in an echo chamber, so to speak, where rather than pulling in outside resources or outside markets, you're left kind of talking one-on-one with someone who is very savvy and does very well at just making money off their real estate from a full-time gig. And that doesn't set up super well for success long-term.
No. And you mentioned something earlier. Last thing I want to kind of cover here in this topic, you mentioned time. We'll put you on the spot a little bit here. How much time into research are you putting, like for looking for locations, driving areas, pre-touring, getting to know the spaces for a client? Just kind of ballpark, if you had to guess.
Gosh, it's a compounding question, because I would say at bare minimum, it's 15, 20 hours easily for each individual client. But that research within the market compounds, where everything you learned in the last interaction compounds into the next. And a lot of times finding those opportunities that are off the market doesn't come by searching them online. It comes from, months or years potentially of researching a specific pocket of the market. But there are, gosh, Rusty, this, especially throughout the Southeast, there's, 7 or 8 different composites of all the different properties that might be available on the market. Sometimes it's they're listed, in one cohesive space, or sometimes you have to pull them in from all over. And the commercial world is not nearly as upkept from that reality. So vetting what's real and what isn't takes a longer portion of
Right.
time.
So this is like escalating time, right? And so
Yes.
most of our clients as healthcare practitioners already work 40 or more hours a week
Gosh.
seeing patients. You're managing a business. You've got soccer practice or swim practice or track meets or dance recitals, music lessons, whatever afterwards for your kids, family. You've got things going on. Are you willing to commit another 15 to 20 hours per week of riding the market, calling landlords, calling listing agents, knocking on doors, learning what the market looks like, who's new, who's moving out, when leases are coming up due, what spaces might be coming up? As you said, for some of those off-market spaces that might be coming, I dare to say a lot of docs probably don't have that kind of time cut out in their week. And then the last thing you want to do on a weekend is 15 or 20 hours worth of work. Oh, by the way, most landlords are off on weekends. They only work during the week. So that's why a tenant buyer representative matters, because A, we have your best interest at heart, Mason, and B, we know the market and have the time to commit to that, because that's our jobs. That's what we do, is represent you, find the best space, learn the market so we can represent our clients to the best of our ability.
And I can't tell you too how many times I've walked in on a situation of somebody who might have just conducted a lease or did something like that in the negotiation, or they might be in it currently. And when you're trying to make up 15 or 20 hours a week, a lot of times it isn't just becomes the sole job of the provider. I can't tell you how many times I'll walk in and the office manager's involved, and the administrative staff has to take on a piece of responsibility. It erodes away at the effectiveness of your team over time, because it is not easy to do. And a lot of times it bogs down already all the other fires that you're putting out on a weekly basis. And then, like you mentioned, our most valuable commodity is our time. Our most valuable asset is our time, being present for our kids, getting to go to those dance recitals and soccer games. And if we don't have to eat into that time, that's the most precious. That's the most valuable. This is a way we can help kind of alleviate some of that stress in the process.
Exactly. So we've talked about the tenant buyer side of it, but in commercial real estate, right, we've got general commercial real estate. There's like hotel, there's land, there's all different kinds. And so I guess I'm going to ask the first question, kind of low hanging fruit here. Is specialization important for healthcare practices?
I would say absolutely. Right. The biggest thing is that, when you're working with, and we're deeply niched in the field, right? We're in healthcare. We're on the buyer and tenant side of commercial real estate. Commercial real estate's a niche. Buyer and tenant side's a niche. Healthcare is a niche. We're triple niched in, which
triple nets we're talking about, right?
Is that really all you do? But there are so many providers to serve in that space. Funny enough, the specialization part, I was kind of thinking about this. Obviously, there are a lot of things that we've seen a lot of things over the last 17 years. As a company, and we share notes probably better than any commercial real estate firm really in the country, because there are so many different case studies and uses that can be talked about from one side of the country or the other, specific negotiations or concessions or anything. But I think the other benefit of specialization truly in this area is that you get access to the entire healthcare network that allows you to get things done in an effective manner. It's not just, knowing the information pertinent to your real estate transaction. It's knowing the contractors who are going to get it done right. The specific banks who are going to be able to meet the need for that specific piece of real estate within the criteria. It's knowing all the equipment, people who can serve and are trusted. I think specialization gives a lot of help to those things. But the biggest one is probably just knowing the overall value that healthcare practices bring into the marketplace. And this doesn't speak, not to speak ill of anybody who's a residential agent or even general commercial agents. There's certainly a place for it, but it can make it feel as a provider coming into the market that you're really at the will of the landlord. It's really hard to get a space. It's hard to find the right types of terms where, in the reality of our world, the providers that we serve are in the driver's seat. They're the ones that should be in control of the transaction, just given the viability of the practices that they're starting. And so knowing the clients that you're serving, the strength of who they are, and then also knowing the strengths and weaknesses of others in the market gives us an opportunity to be really effective with the time management, not making serious mistakes or walking into pitfalls unknowingly, which can definitely happen and frequently does. We come into a lot of messes on the back end if there isn't specialization within the representation for these transactions.
Yeah, I mean, so many comments there for sure. Like you brought up like commercial agents, residential agents. Like I'm not speaking ill of other businesses, but a healthcare practice is the most attractive thing you can bring to a landlord from a business perspective.
Oh gosh,
Healthcare practices pay rent, they pay it on time. They typically don't shutter or shut down. And then if they find a good locations that's convenient for their patients, they're in it for the long haul until they decide to become a landlord themselves and maybe purchase their own real estate.
Right.
But if you bring that to a landlord, he's licking his chops of like, man, I can make so much money on this. And especially if you come in with a general agent or no representation at all, he's fixing to clean up with you. And again, I don't blame him. This is how he or she makes their money. And so that's just a savvy business thing. And so understanding that, like healthcare representation is vital to a healthcare practice, because when you come to market or come to the negotiating table, like you should be in a position of power. As you said, you're in the driver's seat, not the landlord. You're dictating terms because, hey, buddy, like I am bringing in a practice that is going to lift the overall footprint of your space. Like you're going to be able to go and boast to other clients and other potential tenants. We have medical on site, and that's going to help bring in and attract so many other businesses. And so coming from that position of power, like it's important to understand that. But as Peter Parker was once told, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And so with that, you have to have an agent who also understands timelines for things like permitting, credentialing, understand build out costs. Like a dental practice builds out different than a medical practice, builds out different than a med spa, builds out differently than a physical therapy clinic. And so understanding the nuances of each one of those, like you may miss some of that with a general commercial agent, that you have to have copper plating for an MRI or an x-ray machine, that you have to have, special lines, copper lines for dental med gas and water. You have to have plumbing in each room that's different for dental practices, and that's different than a med spa. And so having those agents, and we have been doing this for 17 years as a company, that understand that. And then you hit it earlier. We have a nationwide backing of other agents doing similar deals in other markets, to where I can call up Mason, who's doing deals in Northeast Georgia, East Tennessee, and say, hey, man, this is what I'm going through here. What are you seeing in your market? What terms and rates are you getting? What concessions are you getting from landlords? So there's power in like pooling our collective genius across our company. And there are guys out there with far more experience than Mason and I that we can even call on and get even more a depth of knowledge, thinking like the Eric Sipperleys of the world, the Mike Jorgensens of the world, the Seth Blands of the world, where we can get a ton of great information from them because they're in our network.
Yep. And you were mentioning too, as far as timeframes go, setting the proper expectation from the front, a lot of times, even in the negotiation, helping the landlord see the reason or the cause for an extended period of time for the build out. Because like you mentioned, we got to get permitting, we got to get CDs, we got to get FF&E, we got to do all of these things. But then also so many times that's where the negotiation stops, where, a doctor can be very lucky to even get, the buy-in from the landlord to contribute a couple of dollars in TI and to let them build out without having to pay rent. But a lot of times when practices are getting started too, if there aren't going to be payments from the insurance the day one that you open practice. All the time, there's 90 days from the first day that service is provided to when insurance payments are actually coming in for the doctors. And so having, a 10-month period of time, typically from the time you sign a lease to when you're fully starting to pay your rent, is what would be adequate in this market. But for someone else who's coming in, that would feel like a lot to ask without having the proper expectations set up on the front end. And so, that the massive amount of case studies, like Rusty was saying, with all of the providers that, we've worked with over several decades at this point, allows us to kind of stand on strong legs when we come to the negotiation table. And as you mentioned too, it's not at the fault of these landlords to do really well, like to clean up shop in these negotiations. I don't think, when people were selling their houses during COVID and, appraisal gaps were getting waived and inspections were getting waived, and people, all these sellers were getting as much as they possibly could. That is just human nature, to try to get as much as you can for the assets that you're in. If there isn't somebody to equalize the market, you can't fault somebody for doing really well in the transaction. It's what they're doing for their livelihood. So we just have to come in and kind of knock things down and even the playing field there for
even
sure.
the playing field for sure. And then, I'm a car agent. Mason's a car agent. We're going to brag on our company for a little bit, as we already have. But the other nice thing that comes with that is, contracting with a local car agent. They're going to be able to help you from start to finish with other trusted advisors along the way that y'all are going to see here on Coffee and Contracts with people that I've connected with, to where, like, I know I've got a trusted medical specific lender that I can call if you need financing options. I don't have all those options. I know what's out there, but it would be foolish of me to try and recommend the right deal for you. But I know 3 or 4 lending options or like loan officers that work with medical practices and understand the value of medical practices. So I can put you in touch with those. We have medical specific contractors, CPAs, financial planners, equipment specialists, merchandise specialists, people who can help you outfit your practice at a specific price point for what you're looking for. And we've done deals with these people across the market, so we feel comfortable bringing them to the table when you need assistance outside of our scope, right? Because we know enough about it to be dangerous, but you get start talking like specific code enforcement or specific build out requirements. That's where a medical specific GC or architect can come in and save you a ton of time and money. And we have, through our corporate partnerships, we have people like that nationwide, both that work on national scales and whittled down to the local scales, depending on who your local agent is. They can help streamline what is a clunky, arduous process as much as possibly can be done through people who have done this before, probably worked with some of these landlords before from a GC standpoint, and say, oh yeah, I know how he likes to have things done, or she likes things done in her building. We can make this work for you. That just takes another element of stress off of you from having to do it yourself, right? Because you have a trusted advisor who has other trusted advisors that can help you along the way.
Absolutely. There's a lot of critical professionals that it takes to do this the right way, where the least amount of stress is on the weight of a doctor, right? We don't want anybody, any of the providers that we're serving, that stress to be solely on the shoulders of the doctors that we represent. And so that's the whole goal for sure.
Yeah. And just real quick before we move off of this, some things that you might miss when you work with, my neighbor's sister is a residential agent, or I know somebody at Colliers or CBRE that can help me as well. And no offense to those people out there. They're great people. We do deals with them all the time. But there are things specific to healthcare practices you may miss in concessions. Mason, like free rent and tenant improvement are 2 big ticket items for medical practices. Do you care to talk about how those are important and why a healthcare specific real estate agent might be the key to unlocking some of those things?
Yeah, I think the TI piece, to start with that, I think is really critical to understand the full scope of the work that's going in, right? It's 2026 right now, and I can say with confidence that we haven't seen the cost for construction go down at all in the last 6 years since COVID, and the 6 years before that, and the 60 years before that. It's a increasing scale on costs. And many times what happens is if you're going into to start your practice in the dental field specifically, the cost to build out, are $225, $200, $250 a square foot. And so a lot of times on the TI perspective, it's helping the landlord understand the investment that's being made into the building, that a lot of times without understanding the full picture of what's going in is where you don't see the high contributions of dollar amounts from the landlord. But when we help them see, hey, the investment that's being made into the space, what this client is going to do to be here for the next 10, 15, 20 years, and the fact that this space is going to be even more valuable by the time that they leave, it helps open up the receptiveness on the side of the landlord to contribute far more than what they might be advertising online or what they would ever be willing to admit, even to their own listing agents.
Exactly.
Oftentimes having a scope of several different properties that you're in that same type of process with negotiations is going to open up quite a bit from that TI perspective. And so we see that a lot of times landlords are going to have certain hot buttons where they say, hey, I'm not willing to do this, but I'm willing to do that. And it's also just important to know what the value of a strong TI package looks like to the deal. We saw something recently where a doctor wasn't really given a strong TI package, but the landlord was looking to sell the building and dental was going to really increase the cap rate. They were willing to give 2 years of free rent. So we didn't balk at that. We were going to, that's just fine to get a pretty long free rent package, but knowing the weight of what TI is worth, and then the lack thereof in order to get negotiations one way or another. And then, as you mentioned, free rent, TI, they're both kind of hand in hand as large, big ticket items within the lease. The free rent period is kind of two-part. It has to do with the concessions, or a lot of time that is given for the build out of the space, which can vary in the size of the project, the type of practice that's going in, the overall requirement from architecturals and, getting permitting done, and, everything from an engineering perspective. It can take longer. And so setting that precedent, but then also, as we mentioned, once the practice is ready to go, when doors are ready to be open and patients are ready to be served, there's a component of needing a little bit of time to catch your breath before you're starting to have to pay on that lease. And so negotiating both of those two can be massive. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of concessions just from those two. But Rusty, as you know better than anybody, there's 15 or 20 things within a lease, any given lease, that is a lever to be pulled that can release a pretty significant amount of funds long-term over the lease or the life of the lease.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. Like you nailed it, man. Just from a cost-saving standpoint, whether it's a competitive TI package or you get that back in free rent, like there is so much importance to having proper representation and negotiate those things you may or may not know is on the table. And there's always an ace up the sleeve. Landlord's always sitting with that premier deal in their back pocket that it's going to take the right questions, the right button pressing, and the right agent to take you to market to understand what's out there, to be able to maybe get your dream space for the cost of maybe like your second or third space, right? That maybe we can unlock some things because of the value that we understand as healthcare specialists that we're bringing to the table. And that value is represented in dollar amounts through tenant improvement packages, free rent on top of that. So like you said, make sure you get some breathing room. And buddy, I can't think of a single doc who's opening a practice that would not jump at the idea of not paying for rent for the first 2 years of your practice. That's a great way to get ahead of the game that you may or may not have got, you definitely wouldn't have got if you've done by yourself, and you might miss out by just a more general agent for sure.
Right.
So as we're talking about this, Mason, we've talked about why representation matters, specifically buyer and tenant. We've talked about why specialization matters, and both of those go hand in hand in finding the right location. Location. It's key to the success of your practice, key to your expectations, and it's key to how your business will grow. And so when people hear location, we'll kind of start here. They always think, I got to have road front access on the corner, that kind of thing, which may or may not be the best thing for your practice. Like there's benefits to being road front and being the anchor of a building. There's also maybe someone being on the backside of the building that may doesn't face the major thoroughfare, but has better parking or better access for your patients.
Absolutely.
And so kind of talk about that. I guess we'll start there. So in your opinion, what is location, like the importance of location in a deal like this?
I would say the first question would be the specialty of the practice. There's going to be a very different need for specific types of location for, a pediatric dentist versus, an endodontist or a periodontist. Something to be really mindful of is where your referrals are coming from, where your lead volume is coming from, and taking that into consideration, kind of understanding the full picture. And so as far as location is concerned, Rusty, as you mentioned, you might see that there's variables in each situation. But, to take into considerations, let's say a general practicing dentist or a pediatric dentist, something that's really heavily reliant on actual traffic counts, both from a vehicle perspective, but I also want to take into consideration foot traffic. Are there people walking in front of your practice? As I like to think of target-rich environments for pediatric dentists. I want the middle-aged moms who have a cup of Starbucks in their hand and a bag of Chick-fil-A, and they're headed into a Target. That's quite literally a target-rich environment, because those are the people who are going to be the decision makers for why they should come to your practice rather than someone else. So foot traffic is big in that variety, and then obviously vehicle traffic is important. But you had mentioned something. Sometimes it's really good to be front and center to have the spotlight on you. But other times it's more important to just get a better picture of everything that's happening in the market and a good understanding of what your opportunities are within your financial plan for the project. A lot of times with these healthcare specific, lenders that we're working with, there's a certain amount that's allocated for the full project. And if we're not having to do, a lot towards the real estate portion, whether it's for build out or the costs for rent are a little bit lower, more of those portions can be allocated into marketing. And I would say that's become increasingly important, obviously in the specialty side, but knowing the weight. Once again, it's about knowing the weight of what is the weight of the worth of this real estate as proposed to the cost of it. And then being able to say, ask the critical questions. What could you do with the money that you might be spending more to be right next to that Target or that Starbucks or that Chick-fil-A, be in a very target rich environment versus optimizing your marketing plans from a search engine optimization perspective. And one thing, the difference between real estate, the cost for real estate and the cost for marketing is that marketing spend is going to go down over time, whereas real estate spend is going to go up. There's not really a lease that's out there that's available that doesn't have an escalation clause, or that operating expenses don't get higher, given the other tenants that might be in the space. And so knowing what the value is can be very important. And then being strategic of the overall goal for your practice and knowing how to properly allocate funds from either picking location, or setting up shop in a highly desirable Class A medical office building, rather than that, very greatly positioned space in between the Target and the Starbucks, but having way more patient volume and being closer to a couple of other stronger referral sources can be massive as well, depending on what type of specialty your practice is.
Absolutely. And that goes even deeper layers to that. Like, do you want to be where people live, work, and play? Or is it pertinent for you to be near where other medical providers are? For example, right. I came from the physical therapy world. Most of our patients are coming in 2 or 3 times a week. You don't want to be across town, out on an island by the hospital, the endocrinologies, the gastro clinics, those type things, because people aren't going out there all that often. But if you can be where people live, work, and play, next to Target, next to Kroger, near the Starbucks, the Chick-fil-A, Panera, insert whatever favorite chain here, that's that's a better location for you than maybe a gastroenterologist who wants to be near a hospital because maybe they have to make rounds, or maybe they have patients that they admit straight from the clinic sometimes when things aren't going well. And so understanding the specialization, like the niches for each medical vertical, is huge, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about veterinarians, like, it's hard to find a space for veterinarians in retail strips because of noise, right? Noise issues. Dogs bark. I've got a dog. She's fortunately asleep here on the floor right here, just napping. Like, we're doing a contest with CARR for right now, currently here in March of 2026, where you submit a pet picture, like, of your pet, like, working with you. And mine is going to be my lazy coworker here who lays on the floor, but not all dogs are like that. Like, some of them are real mouthy and real fussy, and understanding that as a healthcare specialist, real estate agent will help you find the right location where you're not going to be, you can get a great location, not be a nuisance to the plaza, and be near where people live, work, and play, to help drive foot traffic and exposure for your practice. Kind of weighing those two options, something that may be missed by a generalist that doesn't understand what the specific needs of each healthcare practice is and how patient behavior and accessibility will influence that.
Oh yeah. I mean, green space alone, but with a vet too. I can't tell you how many times you can find a really great, one of those corporate vet offices where somebody is making a decision from, thousands of miles away potentially, and you pull up and you bring your dog into the vet, and there's nowhere for the dog to go to the bathroom. And so it's just accident after accident, no pun intended. But I mean, there's lots of different individual niches for each individual specialty and each vertical, that knowing those from a 30,000 foot view can be very important, to not necessarily always even finding the best real estate, the best location, but finding the best location that maximizes the profitability for your practice. And that's the big key, is understanding the practice side, the real estate side, and where the two kind of come together.
What a segue. Like, he's a professional here. As we start to land this plane, let's put that all together, right? Because we've looked at it from why tenant buyer is important, why specialization is important, the importance of location. So let's talk about timing for a minute, because timing and strategy are a key part of all of this. And if you have a great agent, they'll understand that. So first steps, I'm a doc, I'm a vet, pharmacist, whatever, and I'm thinking about starting my own practice. What are the first questions I need to be asking, or the first steps I should be taking?
Yeah, I think it's never too early to start planning well, is what I would say. Even if you feel like you're a couple of years out, starting to ask the right questions as far as what market you want to launch in. Sometimes we see providers who come in and say, I think I want to be in either Tennessee or Indiana. And it's like, well, we've got a lot of critical questions to ask before we make the next decision. Taking a look at the overall saturation in the market for your individual practice. And there are lots of different key partners that we can help bring to the table, no matter how early in the process you are, to try to narrow that area down. But I would say if you're looking to start a practice maybe or launch a secondary location, or you're currently in a lease in your space and you just want to know about what it could look like to purchase a property or to build from the ground up, typically around 2 years out is strong from a build out perspective. And then 18 to 12 months is probably prior to when your lease would recommence or when you would want to start opening your doors to practice, is about how early you want to get somebody involved, because of the process of site selection, the process of getting the right contractors involved, making sure that depending on the scope of the project, if you're building a space out, or if you're building from the ground up, there's lots of permitting, a lot of overall communication with the city for cut-ins and, site mapping, all those, demographics, everything there. It typically takes about 12 to 18 months to get something from 0 to 100, from the starting point to the finish line of opening practices doors to serve patients. And so that time frame is really important. But if you don't know, it's always great to reach out and to start having the types of critical conversations that can help guide you, whether it's the type of market that you want to launch into. I'm working with a couple of different clients right now that are deciding between 2 states. And there are lots of different questions that come into play as far as insurance goes, demographics, what the overall trajectory is for the cities that they're into, how much saturation there is for their specific practice. So, around a 2-year time frame is pretty standard to make sure that you're able to execute each part of the process at a high level.
Yeah, exactly, man. And that's so key, is like, it's never too early to start asking questions. Even if you're just got a little itch in your brain that you may want to do this in a couple of years, we can help set you up for success by understanding the market. And also that's where you can loop in your financial planner, your CPA, people who understand your book of business really well. If you don't have one of those, reach out. We can help you find one in your local market. But understanding the book of business can help set you up for success to turn a pipe dream into a reality, right? Because they can help you. There's again, financial planners, CPAs, there's consulting services that can help you understand where your business is now, see a target, and help you start doing the right strategic moves to get to that target so that you can make it happen in a reasonable time to purchase a building, purchase land to build your own building, move to a bigger space, add that extra provider. There's so many nuances and steps to help you get there. You can't go at it alone. Doing it in isolation will never get you there, for sure. So as you're having these conversations, you're thinking about it, like, what are some, I guess, if there's one takeaway here, Mason, from this conversation, one big overarching kind of big picture thing. I'm a new doc. You talked about it starting this conversation early. Like, what is one takeaway that you would want to drive home at the end of this conversation to a doc who's like, okay, I'm interested, I'm in? What's one takeaway for them?
I would just say that you don't have to do it alone. And I think that a lot of times it can feel really daunting when you are trying to take something on of this capacity alone. And a lot of times that's where we see the most mistakes being made, is when you're trying to do a lot of things the best that you know how. And so when we get involved, when the right lending team gets involved, when the right CPA team gets involved, the right real estate specific attorneys, everybody can help lift the burden and lift the weight. And the best part of that process is that it doesn't cost you to have help. It's going to cost you way more to try to do things on your own than to have help. And so I would just say, if you are a healthcare provider, if you're a doctor, you didn't get to where you are by having a slack bone in your body. You are a hard worker. You're diligent. You do things the right way. But sometimes you can work a little bit too hard and not get the results that you want. And so just inviting the right people to the table who want to serve you and get the vision for what your practice is long term can go a long way towards meeting the goals you have way earlier, rather than being stressed or burnout for things that have nothing to do with the overall growth of your practice.
Yeah.
That's
Couldn't have said it better myself, man. Couldn't have said it better myself. One of the themes that you're going to hear throughout this coffee and contracts journey that we're taking together is DIY is for weekend projects in your backyard, not your business. And so you can't do it in isolation. You really can't do it by yourself. And so who represents you, who helps you on that journey, where you choose to practice, the understanding of the whole big picture will determine how good of a deal and how much your practice will benefit from the real estate. Your real estate can work for you or it can work against you. And it all depends on how you set it up from the beginning. And the doctors who have the best results have a team that understands the healthcare market the best. And they don't necessarily move the fastest, but they move with intentionality, right? Mm-hmm. They have the right path in front of them, the right steps to get them to the finish line, the right people surrounding them in their ear, telling them, hey, this is the direction you should go. Here's how you should be posturing your books. Here's a great, lease rate. Here's a great loan percentage, whatever the case may be. Having those people around to help you move intentional is how you get this project to the finish line. So Mason, thank you so much, man. What a wonderful conversation this was. I learned a ton from you about your process and your thoughts behind this, man. Cannot thank you enough for joining me here today.
It's a privilege, man. Thank you again for the invitation, and honored to be here, and looking forward to listening to some of these other calls that you have with some of these other professionals who are going to come on. Got a lot to learn from them. Have had a great time talking with you as well, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And those of you out there listening, if you're thinking about your first location, your second location, or your 10th location, we're here to help. I speak for Mason, myself, and all CARR agents around the country. Down in the show notes underneath, you'll find a link to our Find an Agent feature on our website. If you click that, it'll pull up. You put your state in, it'll show you all the bright, shiny, smiling faces that represent your state. If you happen to click on Tennessee, you'll see both of these as we represent opposite ends of the state. Though we do come together in Nashville and hang out and do some work together, you can find an agent in your neighborhood. Use that feature or reach out to me and Mason. Our contact information is below as well. Be happy to have a coffee conversation to help guide you along the way. So again, Mason, thanks for joining me today. All of y'all, thanks for being here and listening. We'll be back on another episode of Coffee and Contracts. Until then, go be a friend to somebody who needs a friend, and we'll talk soon.